The Resonance Between Us, Episode 12, Soulmates and Shadow Attraction, Destiny, Projection, and Familiar Pain. Hello, and welcome to The Resonance Between Us, a This Place Called Earth series exploring love, language, nervous systems, and the hidden architecture of human connection. In Episode 1, The Signal Before Words, we explored the first subtle movement of attraction, the possibility that connection begins before language catches up. Before the confession, before the label, before the story, something in the body may already be noticing, responding, and orienting towards another person. In Episode 2, Make Choice, we explored what desire may be selecting for beneath conscious preference. Biology, evolutionary inheritance, cultural conditioning, memory, status, projection, and nervous system recognition all begin to participate in what we call attraction. We asked whether attraction is always as free as it feels, and whether what we call my type may reveal both desire and history. In Episode 3, The Nervous System of Love, we moved into attachment, regulation, and emotional safety. We explored how love does not live only in romance or feeling, but also in the body's learned expectations around closeness. Some people regulate us, some activate us. Some feel safe because they help the nervous system soften. Others feel addictive because they awaken uncertainty, pursuit, and old emotional survival patterns. In Episode 4, The Mirror Effect, we explore projection, reflection, hidden recognition, and how another person can reveal what is still unconscious within us. We looked at how attraction can become a mirror, how recognition can be resonance or memory, and how the person we desire may not only show us who they are, but what they awaken in us. In Episode 5, Orbiting, we explored attention fields, presence, interpersonal gravity, and the way attraction can form as a field before it becomes contact. We looked at how attention becomes charged, how people can occupy awareness before anything is spoken, and how orbiting may be biological, psychological, digital, symbolic, spiritual, or all of these at once. In Episode 6, Alpha, Beta, Sigma, we explored archetypes, masculinity, identity construction, and the roles people perform inside the field of attraction. We looked beneath the labels and asked whether dominance is always strength, whether detachment is always sovereignty, and whether softness is really weakness, or whether many of these roles are nervous system strategies shaped into cultural identity. In Episode 7, The Red Pill Consciousness, we explored gender narratives, pain, algorithmic polarization, and how relational wounds can become ideology. We looked at how rejection can become resentment, how cynicism can be mistaken for truth, and how a wounded nervous system can begin calling its armor awakening. In Episode 8, Chemistry, we explored neurobiology, addiction, hormonal bonding, and the way the body can become hooked through desire, reward, uncertainty, and emotional charge. We looked at how chemistry can feel like truth, because the body believes it before the mind can explain it, and how conscious love asks us not to worship the spark, but to understand what the spark is teaching us. In Episode 9, Entanglement, we explored resonance, synchronicity, conscious connection, and the way meaning can move through memory, symbol, intuition, timing, and field. We asked how to honor mystery without abandoning discernment, and how to feel connection without forcing it to become destiny. In Episode 10, The Body Keeps the Bond, we explored somatics, touch, emotional memory, and how relationships become encoded in the body through rhythm, absence, imprint, and sensory association. We looked at why the mind may know a bond has changed, while the body is still learning how to release the rhythm it once lived inside. In Episode 11, The Digital Dating Arena, we explored dating apps, parasocial desire, algorithmic attraction, validation loops, digital intimacy, AI companionship, and how technology reshapes the way attraction begins before presence has fully arrived. We looked at how a match is not a bond, how access is not intimacy, and how the digital field can turn visibility into value before two people have ever truly met. Now we move into soulmates and shadow attraction, because when modern connection feels too shallow, too digital, too transactional, too uncertain, our longing for depth does not disappear. It often moves into spiritual language, destiny narratives, karmic explanations, twin flame mythology, and the feeling that someone was somehow meant for us. There is a reason for that. We do not only want contact, we want meaning. We do not only want attention, we want recognition. We do not only want attraction, we want to feel that something in us has been seen beyond the ordinary surface of life. We want to believe that love is not merely random, mechanical, biological, transactional, algorithmic, or disposable. We want to feel that some encounters matter because they touch something deeper than preference. Conscious love asks us to be careful. What feels destined may sometimes be a projection. What feels spiritual may sometimes be attachment. What feels like fate may sometimes be familiar pain returning in a sacred disguise. And what feels like the universe bringing someone to us may sometimes be the nervous system recognizing a wound it has known before. This does not mean we should dismiss mystery. It does not mean every intense connection is trauma. It does not mean soulmate language is foolish, or that spiritual interpretations have no place in our experiences of love. Some people do arrive in our lives with extraordinary force. Some connections do seem to reveal something profound. Some encounters change the direction of a life. Some people become mirrors, thresholds, awakenings, teachers, wounds, catalysts, or sacred interruptions. But the question is not only whether the connection feels meaningful. The question is what kind of meaning it carries. Does it open consciousness or repeat an old pattern? Does it bring presence or obsession? Does it invite truth or avoidance? Does it deepen love or keep the nervous system circling pain? Does it bring us closer to reality, or does it create a story powerful enough to replace reality? So, let's begin. When pain feels like destiny, some connections feel bigger than the facts. On paper, not much may have happened. A meeting, a conversation, a look, a message, a brief relationship, a situationship, a person who came close and pulled away, a bond that never fully began or never properly ended. From the outside, someone might say, why are you still thinking about them? Or why does this still matter? Or you barely knew them, or they did not even show up properly. But inside the person experiencing it, the connection can feel enormous. It can feel like a door opened somewhere deep in the psyche. The person did not simply enter life, but entered a hidden room inside the self. Suddenly, ordinary language feels too small. Attraction does not quite describe it. Chemistry does not quite hold it. Attachment feels too clinical. Obsession feels too dismissive. The person reaches for larger words. Soulmate, twin flame, karmic bond, destiny, fate, divine timing, sacred mirror, spiritual connection. Sometimes those words feel relieving because they give shape to something that feels impossible to explain. If someone feels unforgettable, soulmate language offers meaning. If the connection is painful, twin flame language can make the pain feel purposeful. If someone is absent, destiny language can turn absence into timing. If the bond is inconsistent, karmic language can turn instability into a lesson. If the longing is intense, spiritual language can make the longing feel holy rather than humiliating. This is why these narratives are so seductive. They do not merely explain love, they dignify pain. They tell the person that what they are feeling is not irrational, not foolish, not embarrassing, not one-sided, not unresolved attachment, not nervous system activation, not repetition, not fantasy, but evidence of something larger. Something shown, something written, something that will eventually make sense. We have to be honest about why that is appealing. Because when the heart is uncertain, meaning can feel like oxygen. When someone pulls away, meaning helps us survive the silence. When a relationship hurts, meaning helps us hold the pain. When longing becomes unbearable, meaning gives the suffering a place to go. The difficulty is that meaning can heal, but meaning can also trap. A story can help us understand an experience, but it can also keep us inside the experience long after reality has shown us enough. A spiritual narrative can open compassion, but it can also make us ignore behavior. A soulmate belief can honor depth, but it can also collapse discernment. A twin flame story can turn emotional unavailability into a spiritual test. A karmic bond can become a way of staying attached to someone who is not actually choosing us. This is where pain begins to feel like destiny. The ache becomes proof. The longing becomes evidence. The intensity becomes confirmation. The inability to move on becomes interpreted as a sign that the bond must be meant for something. The nervous system says I cannot release them, and the mind translates that into they must be my person. But those are not always the same thing. Sometimes we cannot release someone because they touched something sacred. Sometimes because the connection was genuine and unfinished. Sometimes because we love them deeply. Sometimes because they awakened hope. Sometimes because they changed us. But sometimes we cannot release someone because they activated an old wound so precisely that the body still believes this is the place where the wound might finally be repaired. That distinction is crucial. A person may feel familiar not because they are destined, but because they recreate an emotional climate the body already knows. If love once meant uncertainty, then uncertainty may feel romantic. If closeness once came with distance, then distance may feel magnetic. If affection once had to be earned, then someone hard to reach may feel valuable. If attention was inconsistent in early life, then intermittent attention in adulthood may feel like chemistry. If being chosen once felt uncertain, then someone unavailable may become the stage where the old ache tries to win a new ending. This is a shadow attraction. It is not simply being attracted to what is bad for us. It is being drawn towards what is unresolved in us. Towards the person, pattern, dynamic, emotional climate, or archetype that reflects something we have not yet fully integrated. It is the pull towards familiar pain because familiar pain carries the promise of repair. And this is why shadow attraction can feel so powerful. It is not random. It often has meaning. But the meaning may not be, this person is my destiny. The meaning may be, this person has activated a pattern I now have the chance to see consciously. The person becomes a mirror. Not always a life partner. Not always a soulmate in the romantic sense. Not always a destination. A mirror. They reveal the wound of not being chosen. The ache of wanting unavailable love. The fantasy of being rescued. The longing to rescue someone else. The desire to be seen by someone emotionally distant. The addiction to intensity. The belief that love must be earned. The pull towards chaos because calm feels unfamiliar. The wish that this time, the old pattern will finally become safe. This is why conscious love asks us to slow down before calling everything fate. The feeling may be real. The resonance may be real. The spiritual charge may be real. The person may genuinely matter. But the meaning of that mattering still requires discernment. Does this connection make me more present or more obsessive? Does it make me more honest or more self-abandoning? Does it bring me closer to reality or deeper into interpretation? Does it lead to mutuality, communication, care, and responsibility? Or mostly to waiting, decoding, hoping, and explaining away absence? These questions do not kill the mystery. They protect it from becoming an illusion. A truly meaningful connection should not require us to betray ourselves to believe in it. It should not require us to ignore repeated behavior. It should not require us to call pain sacred simply because we cannot release it. It should not require us to confuse being activated with being loved. Some connections are spiritually significant because they reveal where love is possible. Others are spiritually significant because they reveal where we are still wounded. Both can matter, but they do not ask for the same response. One may ask us to open more deeply. The other may ask us to wake up, grieve, reclaim ourselves, and stop calling repetition destiny. So the opening question of this episode is not whether soulmates are real in some absolute way. It is not whether spiritual connection exists, or whether all intense attraction can be reduced to trauma. Those questions are too flat for the complexity of human experience. The deeper inquiry is this: when I call something destiny, what part of me is speaking? Is it the grounded self-recognizing truth? The wounded self longing for repair? The lonely self reaching for meaning? The body remembers familiar pain? The soul recognizing a mirror? Or the nervous system trying to turn uncertainty into certainty? That is where episode 12 begins, in the charged space between soulmates and shadow attraction, between destiny and projection, between sacred recognition and familiar pain. The linguistic decode: soulmate, destiny, fate, union, toxicity, and passion. Before we move into the psychological and spiritual layers of soulmates and shadow attraction, we need to slow down the language itself, because the words we use around intense connection are not passive. They do something to the nervous system. They frame the experience. They shape what we notice, what we excuse, what we hope for, what we wait for, and what we believe pain means. When someone says they are my soulmate, the body may soften into certainty. When someone says it was destiny, the mind may stop asking whether the relationship is actually mutual. When someone says this is fate, the feeling of choice can disappear. When someone says we are meant to be in union, the present reality of absence, inconsistency, or emotional unavailability can become less important than the imagined future. When someone says it is toxic, the word may name real harm, but it can also prevent us from looking more deeply at the pattern. And when someone says the passion is undeniable, intensity can begin to impersonate truth. So the first word is soulmate. In modern romantic language, soulmate usually means the one, the person meant for us, the perfect partner, the one who recognizes us beyond the ordinary surface of life. The person whose presence feels like home, destiny, spiritual recognition, or completion. The word carries longing inside it. It suggests that love is not accidental, that somewhere, somehow, there is someone whose inner world fits ours in a way that cannot be fully explained. There is beauty in that idea. We do not only want compatibility, we want recognition. We want to feel that someone sees what others miss. We want to be met beneath performance, beneath surface, beneath the daily roles we play. The soulmate idea speaks to a deep desire that love can be more than negotiation, more than convenience, more than biological attraction, more than two people choosing each other because the timing happens to work. But the word soulmate can also become dangerous when it turns a person into proof of cosmic certainty. Once we call someone a soulmate, we may stop seeing them clearly. We may begin interpreting everything through the story. Their absence becomes a lesson. Their inconsistency becomes a fear of the connection. Their silence becomes a spiritual test. Their inability to meet us becomes part of the journey. We may start giving the narrative more authority than the person's behavior. The deeper frame then is this: soulmate is a symbolic word for profound recognition, but it can collapse discernment when it turns another person into destiny before reality has confirmed the bond. A soulmate should not be someone who requires self-abandonment. It should not be someone whose significance depends on constant explanation. It should not be someone who only exists as potential. It should not be someone whose absence has to be mythologized to keep hope alive. If someone is truly meaningful, their meaning should not require us to deny what is happening. The second word is destiny. Destiny suggests that something is meant to happen, that life has a hidden pattern, that a person arrived not randomly, but as part of a deeper design. In love, destiny language can feel incredibly powerful because it makes the connection feel guided. It turns chance into purpose. It turns coincidence into a message. It turns attraction into a kind of path. And again, there can be value in that. Some encounters do change the direction of a life. Some people arrive at exactly the moment we are ready to see something. Some relationships reveal what years of ordinary reflection could not. Destiny language can give dignity to the strange timing of connection. It can honor the feeling that certain people matter beyond the measurable facts. But destiny can also remove responsibility. If something is destined, then why question it? Why set boundaries? Why walk away? Why ask whether the other person is actually showing up? Why examine whether the connection is mutual, grounded, safe, and real? Destiny language can become a way of handing agency to the story. Instead of asking, what is happening here, we say, it must be happening for a reason. And while that may be true in one sense, it can become a problem if the reason becomes more important than reality. The deeper frame of destiny is, destiny language can give meaning to uncertainty, but it can also remove agency, boundaries, and responsibility from the relational field. A conscious relationship to destiny does not mean surrendering discernment. It means allowing meaning without abandoning choice. It means saying, this person may matter. This connection may have arrived for a reason, but I am still responsible for how I respond. I am still allowed to ask whether this is healthy. I am still allowed to leave what harms me. I am still allowed to distinguish significance from suitability. Because not everyone who is destined to enter our lives is destined to stay in the way we imagined. Some people are catalysts. Some are mirrors. Some are teachers. Some are warnings. Some are openings. Some are wounds made visible. Some are bridges to the self. The mistake is assuming that destiny always means partnership. Sometimes destiny means revelation. The third word is fate. Fate is close to destiny, but it often carries a heavier feeling. Fate suggests inevitability, what cannot be escaped, what has already been written. In romantic language, fate can feel intoxicating because it reduces uncertainty. If the relationship is fated, then the current confusion becomes temporary. If the person is fated, then the silence is not final. If the connection is fated, then the pain is part of the path. This can be comforting when the nervous system is struggling with ambiguity. Ambiguity is hard for the body. Not knowing whether someone cares, whether something is over, whether a message will come, whether the feeling is mutual, whether the bond means anything, this can create intense activation. Fate offers relief. It says you do not have to tolerate the uncertainty. There is a hidden certainty underneath it. But sometimes fate becomes a container for longing when the body cannot accept loss, incompatibility, or absence. This is where we have to be careful. If fate language helps someone hold a painful experience with grace, it may serve them. But if it keeps them waiting for someone who is not choosing them, ignoring behavior that clearly reveals the truth, or romanticizing a pattern that repeatedly causes harm, then fate becomes less like wisdom and more like captivity. The deeper frame is, fate can become a container for longing when the nervous system does not want to accept ambiguity, incompatibility, or loss. A person may say, if it is meant for me, it will come back. Sometimes that sentence can help release control, but sometimes it becomes a waiting room where life is paused. The body stays organized around return. The heart stays loyal to possibility. The person keeps interpreting signs, dreams, songs, numbers, and timings as evidence that the story is not over. But love cannot only live as waiting. If something is real, it must eventually touch reality. The fourth word is union. Union is a beautiful word when understood deeply. It suggests coming together, joining, integration, intimacy, mutual presence, and the meeting of two lives. In spiritual romantic language, union often implies reunion with a counterpart, twin flame, soulmate, divine masculine, divine feminine, or destined partner. It carries the promise of completion. One day the separation will end, the pain will make sense, the bond will become whole, and the two will become one. At its healthiest, a union can represent conscious relational integration. Two people do not lose themselves in each other, but meet from wholeness. They bring body, mind, heart, truth, sexuality, vulnerability, and responsibility into a shared field. Union becomes not a fantasy merger, but mature intimacy, a joining that honors both connection and distinction. But union can also become fantasy merger. This happens when two incomplete selves seek salvation through each other. When the other person is expected to heal the wound, complete the identity, end the loneliness, validate the soul, or finally resolve the pain of not being chosen. In that state, union is not really love. It is an escape from separation. It is the wish to dissolve the ache of selfhood through another person. This is where soulmate and twin flame narratives can become dangerous. They may encourage people to wait for the union while neglecting the work of integration. The person becomes focused on the eventual coming together, but not on the reality of who they are becoming while they wait. They may confuse longing for growth. They may confuse pain for purification. They may confuse obsession with devotion. The deeper frame is this: union can represent conscious relational integration, but it can also become a fantasy merger, where two incomplete selves seek salvation through each other. True union should not erase the self. It should not make someone smaller, more anxious, more dependent, more obsessive, or less grounded. A mature union allows two people to meet without one becoming the cure for the other's wound. It is not two halves desperately trying to become whole. It is two living beings learning whether their wholeness can enter a relationship without collapsing into possession, projection, or dependency. The fifth word is toxic. Toxic is a word that has become common in modern relationship language. It can be useful. Sometimes a dynamic really is harmful. Manipulation, emotional abuse, coercion, repeated disrespect, cruelty, dishonesty, humiliation, betrayal, control, contempt, and chronic instability need language. People often need a clear word to recognize that something is damaging them. But the word toxic can also become vague. It can flatten complexity. It can become a label we use when we do not want to examine the deeper pattern. If someone says it was toxic, they may be naming real harm, but there may still be important questions beneath that word. What made it toxic? Was it control? Avoidance? Attachment anxiety? Emotional unavailability? Trauma bonding? Intermittent reinforcement? Lack of boundaries? Shadow attraction? The collision of two wounded nervous systems? A familiar childhood pattern repeating in adult form? The deeper frame is, toxic can sometimes name real harm, but it can also become shorthand that prevents deeper inquiry into pattern, attachment, fear, desire, and repetition. This does not mean we should overanalyze harm until we excuse it. Some things are simply not acceptable. But if we only call something toxic and never examine why we were drawn to it, why we stayed, what it activated, what it promised, or what it repeated, then the same pattern may return in another form. The word toxic can close a door that consciousness still needs to open. Not to return, not to justify, not to romanticize, but to understand. Shadow attraction often hides beneath what we later call toxic. The relationship may have hurt us, but it may also have revealed our relationship to chaos, longing, proving, rescue, abandonment, instability, passion, fear, and self-worth. The label names the damage. The deeper inquiry reveals the pattern. The sixth word is passion. Passion is one of the most seductive words in love. It suggests fire, intensity, aliveness, chemistry, sexual charge, emotional force, hunger, longing, and creative energy. Passion can be beautiful. Without passion, love can become flat, mechanical, dutiful, or overly controlled. Passion brings life into the field. It awakens the body. It makes the connection feel alive. But passion is not always love. Sometimes passion is nervous system activation. Sometimes it is the excitement of uncertainty. Sometimes it is the thrill of being chosen by someone hard to reach. Sometimes it is sexual chemistry without emotional safety. Sometimes it is the body mistaking danger for aliveness. Sometimes it is old chaos returning with a beautiful face. The deeper frame is, passion can be alive and sacred, but it can also be nervous system activation mistaken for love. This distinction is essential. Real passion does not have to destroy the self. It does not have to depend on anxiety. It does not have to require emotional volatility. It does not have to make peace feel boring. It does not have to confuse intensity with depth. Passion can exist alongside tenderness, consistency, respect, communication, and safety. But if passion only appears when the bond is uncertain, when the person is unavailable, when the dynamic is unstable, or when the nervous system is trying to win love from someone who withholds it, then we may not be dealing with sacred fire. We may be dealing with activation. This is one of the great confusions of shadow attraction. The body feels alive, and the mind calls it love. But the body can feel alive for many reasons: desire, fear, uncertainty, novelty, familiar pain, hope, competition, shame, relief, the possibility of repair, the ache of finally being chosen by someone who resembles the old unavailable figure. So we must ask not only, is there passion? We must ask, what is this passion made of? Does it make me more present, more honest, more alive in a grounded way, more capable of love? Or does it make me anxious, obsessive, self-abandoning, unstable, and dependent on the other person's attention? When we bring these words together, soulmate, destiny, fate, union, toxic, and passion, we begin to see how language can either deepen consciousness or replace it. These words are powerful because they speak to real human experiences. Recognition is real. Timing can feel meaningful. Some bonds are profound. Some connections change us. Some relationships are harmful. Passion can be sacred. Love can feel guided by forces we do not fully understand. But the words themselves are not proof. A soulmate is not proof of mutuality. Destiny is not proof of safety. Fate is not proof that we should wait. Union is not proof that a merger is healthy. Toxic is not the end of inquiry. Passion is not proof of love. Conscious relating asks us to use language as a lantern, not a cage. The word should help us see more clearly, not trap us inside a story. If soulmate language opens gratitude, humility, reverence, and discernment, it may serve love. If it makes us ignore behavior, it may serve as a fantasy. If destiny language helps us honor meaning while staying grounded, it may serve growth. If it removes agency, it may serve avoidance. If passion awakens the body while deepening presence, it may be life-giving. If it keeps us addicted to uncertainty, it may be the wound-wearing fire. The language we use around intense connection matters because it teaches the body how to interpret the bond, and sometimes healing begins when we change the sentence. Not they are my soulmate, so I must wait, but this connection revealed something profound and I still need to honor reality. Not this pain proves it is deep, but this pain may be showing me where I am still attached, activated, or repeating an old wound. Not it is fate, but something meaningful happened here and I still have agency. Not the passion means this is love, but the intensity is real and I need to understand what it is made of. That is the linguistic shift of this episode. To honor the depth without surrendering discernment. To respect the mystery without worshipping the wound. To let language illuminate love without allowing language to turn familiar pain into destiny. The scientific and psychological layer, attachment templates, repetition, compulsion, and familiar pain. When we talk about soulmates, destiny, fate, passion, and shadow attraction, it is tempting to remain in the spiritual or symbolic layer. Those words naturally pull us towards mystery. They suggest forces beyond conscious choice, beyond ordinary compatibility, beyond biology, beyond personal history. And sometimes that language does capture something real in the lived experience of connection. Some encounters do feel uncanny. Some people do feel strangely familiar. Some relationships seem to arrive at exactly the moment we were ready to see something. Some bonds do change us in ways that feel larger than the facts. But to understand why some connections feel destined, we also have to look at what the psyche and nervous system recognize beneath conscious thought. Because the body not only recognizes safety, it recognizes familiarity, and familiarity is not always the same as love. A person may feel powerful to us because they remind the nervous system of a pattern it has known before. Their distance, their tone, their intensity, their inconsistency, their charm, their emotional unavailability, their need to be rescued, their withholding, their warmth followed by absence, all of it may feel strangely familiar, not because it is spiritually ordained, but because it resembles an emotional climate the body has already learned how to survive. This is the first psychological layer of shadow attraction, attachment templates. An attachment template is not just a conscious belief about love. It is an internal map built from early relational experience. It tells the body what closeness feels like, what distance means, whether love is reliable, whether affection is safe, whether needs are welcomed or punished, whether conflict leads to repair or abandonment, whether being seen feels comforting or dangerous, whether intimacy comes with steadiness, or whether it comes with anxiety. These templates often form before we have language for them. A child does not sit there thinking, my nervous system is learning that love is inconsistent. The body simply adapts. It learns the rhythm of the environment. It learns whether comfort arrives. It learns whether attention must be earned. It learns whether emotional expression is safe. It learns whether closeness is warm, intrusive, absent, unpredictable, conditional, or frightening. Then later in life, the body may call this familiarity chemistry. If someone's affection is uncertain and uncertainty is part of the original template, the connection may feel charged. If someone is emotionally distant and distance has always been linked with longing, the body may become alert. If someone gives warmth and then withdraws and the old pattern was warmth followed by absence, the nervous system may become highly activated. The person feels significant not only because of who they are, but because they activate an old relational map. This is why steady love can sometimes feel boring to a nervous system trained by instability. It is not because steady love lacks depth. It is because the body may not recognize calm as love yet. If love was once associated with waiting, proving, chasing, appeasing, worrying, decoding, or earning attention, then peace can feel unfamiliar. Safety can feel flat. Availability can feel suspicious. Consistency can feel less exciting than the person whose attention arrives unpredictably. That is not a moral failure, it is conditioning. The nervous system often moves towards what it knows until consciousness helps it learn something new. This is why familiar pain can feel like fate. The body recognizes the pattern and says, I know this. The mind translates the intensity and says, this must mean something, and perhaps it does mean something. But the meaning may not be, this is my destined partner. The meaning may be, this is the emotional weather my system still recognizes as love. That distinction matters because it changes the entire interpretation of attraction. A powerful pull may not always be proof of compatibility. It may be proof of recognition, but recognition can be healthy or unhealthy. We can recognize safety. We can recognize kindness. We can recognize shared values. We can recognize another person's depth, truth, tenderness, and presence. But we can also recognize abandonment. We can recognize emotional distance. We can recognize manipulation. We can recognize the old ache of wanting someone to choose us. We can recognize the familiar feeling of being almost loved. The body does not always immediately distinguish between these forms of recognition. It simply says, this is known. And what is known can feel strangely intimate. This brings us to repetition compulsion. Repetition compulsion is the tendency to return, consciously or unconsciously, to emotional situations that resemble unresolved wounds. It is not usually because people want to suffer. It is because the psyche is trying to complete something. It returns to the scene, or a version of the scene, hoping this time the ending will be different. If the wound was abandonment, the person may be drawn to someone who feels hard to keep, hoping this time they will be chosen. If the wound was emotional unavailability, they may be drawn to someone distant, hoping this time distance will become intimacy. If the wound was not being seen, they may be drawn to someone whose attention feels difficult to earn, hoping this time their worth will be recognized. If the wound was chaos, they may find intensity familiar and calm unfamiliar. If the wound was controlled, they may either seek someone controlling because it feels known, or seek to control the relationship themselves to avoid feeling powerless again. The psyche is not stupid. It is symbolic. It often tries to heal by recreating the emotional conditions of the wound, but with the fantasy of a better outcome. The child self says, in effect, this time I will be loved. This time I will be chosen. This time I will be enough. This time I will make the unavailable person stay. This time I will rescue them. This time I will finally become worthy. This is one of the reasons shadow attraction feels so compelling. It is not only an attraction to the person, it is an attraction to the possibility of rewriting the wound. The person becomes a doorway into an old story. They may represent the parent who did not see us, the partner who left, the love that never arrived, the safety that was never stable, the approval we could not secure, the intimacy that always remained out of reach. And because they carry this symbolic charge, they can feel larger than themselves. They become destiny because they seem to offer resolution. But the danger is that the person may not actually be capable of providing the resolution. They may simply be repeating the emotional conditions that created the wound. And if we confuse repetition with repair, we may stay inside the pattern, waiting for the very person who activates the wound to become the person who heals it. This is where intermittent reinforcement becomes central. Intermittent reinforcement is one of the most powerful bonding mechanisms in unstable relationships. When affection, attention, intimacy, approval, or warmth arrive unpredictably, the nervous system can become more focused, not less. The person does not know when the next reward will come, so attention remains fixed. The body waits, it scans, it hopes. It remembers the good moments, it tries to earn the return. In love, this can look like someone being intensely present, then distant, warm, then cold, affectionate, then unavailable, loving, then dismissive, deep, then avoidant, sexual, then emotionally absent. They create a rhythm of activation and relief. The nervous system becomes attached not only to the person, but to the cycle. The relief becomes addictive. After silence, a message feels enormous. After distance, affection feels sacred. After uncertainty, clarity feels like love. After feeling unwanted, being chosen again feels like salvation. The nervous system says, there it is. The connection is real, but what it may actually be experiencing is relief after deprivation. This is why painful relationships can feel more intense than stable ones. The body confuses relief with love. This is especially dangerous when the person provides just enough warmth to keep hope alive, but not enough consistency to create safety. The bond remains open. The person never fully arrives, but never fully leaves. They offer enough to activate longing, enough to create memory, enough to suggest possibility, but not enough to ground the connection in reality. That kind of bond can feel spiritual because it never fully becomes ordinary. It remains suspended. It remains unresolved. It remains charged. A steady relationship eventually becomes real. It enters routine. It reveals limitations. It includes ordinary days. It requires repair, communication, responsibility, and mutual care. But an unresolved bond can remain mythic because it is never fully tested by life. The person stays partly in imagination. They become a symbol, a possibility, a future, a story, a wound, a promise. The less reality there is, the more projection can fill the space. This is where shadow attraction and soulmate fantasy overlap. The person may feel like a soulmate because they are not fully known. They are partly known and partly imagined. They have enough presence to activate longing, but enough absence to allow projection. Their inconsistency keeps the mind searching for meaning. Their distance allows the fantasy to remain alive. Their occasional warmth becomes proof. Their silence becomes a mystery. Their unavailability becomes spiritually significant. But again, conscious love asks, what is this made of? Is the connection deep or is it unresolved? Is the person truly present or symbolically powerful? Is the bond mutual or mostly internal? Is this passion or activation? Is this fate or familiar pain? Trauma attraction sits in this same territory. Trauma attraction does not mean someone is attracted to abuse, simplistically or shamefully. It means unresolved emotional wounds can shape what feels compelling. A person may be drawn towards dynamics that recreate the nervous system state of earlier pain. Not because pain is desired, but because pain is familiar, and familiar pain carries the unconscious hope of transformation. This is important to approach with compassion. People often shame themselves for being drawn to the wrong person, the unavailable person, the chaotic person, the narcissistic person, the emotionally distant person, or the one who cannot meet them. But attraction is not always a rational endorsement. Sometimes attraction is the body pointing towards an unresolved pattern. The question is not, why was I so foolish? The question is, what is my nervous system recognizing? What feels familiar here? What am I trying to repair? What role am I entering? Am I trying to be chosen? Am I trying to rescue? Am I trying to prove my worth? Am I trying to finally win warmth from someone who withholds it? Am I confusing intensity with intimacy because calm still feels unknown? This is where narcissistic or emotionally unavailable cycles can become particularly gripping. A person who comes in strongly, idealizes, gives intense tension, creates a feeling of being special, then begins withdrawing, criticizing, confusing, controlling, or becoming inconsistent, can create a powerful trauma bond. The initial intensity becomes the reference point. The person remembers how it felt at the beginning. They keep chasing the return of that original version. The nervous system says, if I can just get back there, it will be okay. But often the beginning was not the whole truth. It was the hook. Or it was one part of the person that could not be sustained. The bond then becomes organized around recovering a state that may never have been stable. This is why people can stay attached to potential. They are not only attached to who the person is now. They are attached to who the person seemed to be, who they might become, who they were in the beginning, who they are in brief moments of tenderness, who they could be if healed, who they might be if they finally chose love. Potential becomes a drug. Soulmate language can intensify this. They are not ready yet. They are running from the connection. They are scared of the intensity. They are my twin flame. They are healing. They will come back when divine timing allows. Sometimes these interpretations may contain partial truth. People do fear intimacy. People do run from depth. People do need healing. Timing does matter. But a partial truth can still become total illusion if it makes us ignore the present reality. Someone may be afraid of intimacy, but that does not mean we should wait indefinitely. Someone may be wounded, but that does not mean we should become the container for their avoidance. Someone may feel a connection, but that does not mean they are capable of a relationship. Someone may return repeatedly, but that does not mean they are building anything. Someone may be significant, but that does not mean they are safe. Psychologically, this is where discernment has to become stronger than fantasy. Attachment systems are powerful because they not only respond to what is good for us, they respond to what is meaningful, familiar, and emotionally charged. A bond can feel profound because it activates deep layers of memory, not because it is healthy. A person can feel unforgettable because they opened a wound, not because they are meant to stay. A relationship can feel spiritual because the psyche is using it as a symbolic stage for unfinished healing. None of this reduces love to pathology. It simply gives us a way to separate meaning from conclusion. A connection can be meaningful without being meant to continue. A person can be important without being safe. A bond can be transformative without being a life partnership. An attraction can reveal a wound without requiring reunion. A painful relationship can teach us something without becoming destiny. This is one of the great liberations of conscious relating. We do not have to deny meaning to leave. We do not have to call something meaningless just because it was not healthy. We do not have to pretend the connection was nothing to stop choosing it. Sometimes the truth is more complex. It mattered deeply, and it still should not continue. It awakened something, and it also repeated something. It was beautiful in places and painful in others. It was a mirror, but not a home. The nervous system often struggles with that level of complexity. It wants simple categories, soulmate or mistake, destiny or delusion, love or trauma, sacred or toxic. But human relationships are often mixed. The person may have brought tenderness and pain, recognition and projection, desire and anxiety, meaning and harm, growth and confusion. This is why the scientific and psychological layers are not meant to destroy mystery. It is meant to make mystery safer. Because if we understand attachment templates, we can ask whether the connection is repeating an old emotional climate. If we understand repetition compulsion, we can ask whether we are trying to rewrite a wound through another person. If we understand intermittent reinforcement, we can ask whether the intensity comes from love or from uncertainty. If we understand trauma attraction, we can ask whether the person represents healing or familiar pain. If we understand unavailable cycles, we can stop mistaking moments of warmth for a sustainable relationship. This is not cynicism, it is care. Care for the self, care for the body, care for the heart, care for the possibility that love should not require us to abandon reality. So what does a healthier connection feel like in this framework? It may still have passion. It may still have a mystery. It may still have spiritual significance. It may still feel deep, meaningful, and transformative. But it does not depend on constant anxiety to remain alive. It does not require us to decode silence endlessly. It does not require us to explain away repeated absence. It does not make us smaller in order to keep the story intact. It does not turn self-abandonment into devotion. A healthier connection allows the nervous system to settle as well as awaken. That is important. Many people think love should only awaken. It should create spark, desire, longing, excitement, inspiration, and intensity. And yes, those things may be part of love. But love must also be able to settle. It must allow the body to breathe. It must create enough safety for truth. It must allow both people to become more present, not more fragmented. If a connection only awakens but never settles, it may not be love in a sustainable form. It may be activation. It may be longing. It may be shadow. It may be chemistry. It may be a wound-seeking completion. If a connection only settles but never awakens, something may also be missing. Conscious love is not about choosing dead safety over aliveness. It is about learning the difference between aliveness and dysregulation, between passion and panic, between recognition and repetition, between sacred fire and nervous system chaos. This distinction requires patience because the body may not know it at first. A nervous system trained by chaos may misread calm as absence. A nervous system trained by rejection may misread pursuit as love. A nervous system trained by emotional distance may feel most alive around people who remain out of reach. A nervous system trained by proving may feel attracted to those who require performance. A nervous system trained by neglect may not trust tenderness when it arrives without conditions. So healing often involves re-educating attraction, not forcing ourselves to want what we do not want, not shaming desire, but becoming curious about the architecture beneath it. What am I drawn to? What state does this person create in me? Do I feel more grounded or more activated? Do I feel invited into truth or pulled into performance? Do I feel safe enough to be myself? Or am I trying to become the version of me that might finally be chosen? Does this connection expand my dignity or erode it? Do I feel love, or do I feel the old hope of finally winning love? The answer may not appear immediately. Shadow attraction is persuasive because it often contains real desire. It is rarely purely false. There may be genuine chemistry, genuine tenderness, genuine resonance, genuine connection. That is what makes it difficult. If it were only pain, we might leave more easily. But it is often a mixture of real feeling and old patterns. The work is not to deny the feeling. The work is to understand the mixture. This is where we begin to see familiar pain not as something to be ashamed of, but as information. The pull towards someone unavailable may reveal where we still equate love with pursuit. The attraction to chaos may reveal where calm still feels unfamiliar. The obsession with being chosen may reveal where self-worth became tied to external approval. The intensity around someone inconsistent may reveal where the body confuses relief with intimacy. When seen this way, shadow attraction becomes an invitation to consciousness. The person may be the trigger, but the pattern is the lesson. If we can learn the lesson, we may no longer need the repetition. This is the deeper psychological movement of episode 12. We are not trying to strip love of meaning. We are trying to prevent meaning from becoming a hiding place. We are not saying soulmate experiences are impossible. We are saying that the feeling of destiny should be held alongside attachment awareness. We are not saying passion is bad. We are saying passion must be examined for what it is made of. We are not saying every painful bond is trauma. We are saying pain should not automatically be elevated into sacred proof. Because the strongest pull is not always the deepest love. Sometimes it is the oldest wound recognizing another chance to be chosen, and conscious love begins when we can feel that pull without surrendering our discernment to it. The mirror layer, the person as projection, wound, archetype, or unfinished story. Once we understand the psychological layer of attachment templates, repetition compulsion, intermittent reinforcement, and familiar pain, we can begin to see why certain people become so much larger than themselves inside us. This is the mirror layer. Because sometimes the person we desire is not only a person, they become a screen for meaning, a place where the psyche projects longing, hope, unfinished grief, sexual energy, spiritual imagination, childhood wounds, rescue fantasies, and the need to be chosen. They may be real. The connection may be real. The chemistry may be real. But the meaning gathered around them may become larger than what the actual relationship can hold. This is why some connections feel overwhelming. We are not only responding to what is happening between two people in the present. We may be responding to everything the person has come to represent. The one who finally understands us. The one who might rescue us from loneliness. The one who seems to carry the missing masculine or feminine principle. The one who feels like a sacred mirror. The one who activates desire so intensely that the body calls it destiny. The one who awakens the part of us that still hopes the old wound can have a different ending. The person becomes symbolic, and when someone becomes symbolic, discernment becomes harder. The first layer is projection. Projection is not always negative. In ordinary life, we are constantly interpreting other people through the lens of our own inner world. We notice certain qualities, we imagine certain motives, we feel certain possibilities. Attraction itself often begins through partial information. We see a face, hear a voice, read a message, sense a tone, notice a gesture, and the mind starts completing the picture. But in intense attraction, projection can become powerful. We may place onto someone qualities they have not yet proven: emotional depth, loyalty, spiritual purpose, safety, healing power, future compatibility, hidden love, or destiny. The person may have shown us fragments, but the psyche builds a whole image around those fragments. A few honest conversations become proof of deep emotional availability. A shared wound becomes proof of soulmate recognition. A moment of eye contact becomes proof of mutual knowing. A powerful sexual charge becomes proof of spiritual union. A coincidence becomes proof that the universe has arranged the connection. And maybe some of those things matter. Maybe the person did touch something true. Maybe there was resonance. Maybe there was mutual recognition. The problem is not that projection is always false. The problem is that projection often moves faster than reality. Reality takes time. Reality asks what someone does when the initial charge fades. Reality asks whether they can communicate, whether they can repair, whether they can show up, whether they can be honest, whether they can hold emotional responsibility, whether they can meet the bond in embodied life rather than only in imagination, chemistry, or symbolism. Projection does not wait for all that. Projection fills the gap. When the gap is large, the projection can become enormous. This is especially true when the connection is ambiguous. If someone is partly available and partly absent, partly warm and partly distant, partly known and partly mysterious, the mind has more room to build meaning. The less consistent reality provides, the more the psyche supplies. The person becomes an unfinished image, and the imagination keeps painting. This is why unavailable people can become so symbolically charged. Their absence creates space for fantasy. Their silence becomes something to interpret. Their return becomes meaningful. Their distance becomes a test. Their inconsistency becomes a mystery. Their lack of clear presence becomes a canvas for destiny. But the mirror asks, am I relating to the person or to what I have placed upon them? That question is not easy, because projection often feels like truth from the inside. We do not experience it as projection. We experience it as recognition, certainty, knowing, a feeling that says there is something about them, and perhaps there is. But the mature question is, what exactly is the something? Is it their actual character, their behavior, their presence, their consistency, their capacity for love? Or is it what they awaken in me? This brings us to the person as wound. Sometimes someone activates an old wound so precisely that we mistake activation for importance. They touch the part of us that still wants to be chosen, still wants to be seen, still wants to be enough, still wants the unavailable figure to finally turn towards us and say, I am here, I choose you, you were worth loving all along. The emotional force of that can be immense. A person who resembles the wound may feel more powerful than a person who offers peace. Not because they are more loving, but because they stand at the entrance to an old ache. The body feels the possibility of repair. The psyche feels the old story restarting. The child self begins hoping for a new ending. This is how pain can become romanticized. The person not only hurt us, they also hold the promise of ending the hurt. They create longing, then become the imagined cure for longing. They create uncertainty, then become the one whose certainty would heal it. They withhold, then become the one whose approval would feel like salvation. This is why shadow attraction can become so difficult to leave. The person may be the trigger and the imagined medicine at the same time, but the medicine is often not in them. It is in the wound becoming conscious. The person may reveal where we still abandon ourselves for affection, where we confuse being chosen with being healed, where we turn someone's inconsistency into a spiritual challenge, where we keep hoping the unavailable person will become emotionally present, not because they have shown real capacity, but because an older part of us cannot bear another repetition of being left unseen. If the person is a wound, then the work is not only to ask whether they love us. The work is to ask what wound they are standing inside. What do I feel I must become to be chosen by them? What old story does their distance awaken? What part of me is trying to earn what should be freely given? What would it mean if they never became the person I hoped they were? And what part of me would I have to grieve if I stopped calling this destiny? Then there is the person as archetype. In intense attraction, people often become more than individuals. They become figures, symbols, roles. The divine masculine, the divine feminine, the savior, the muse, the protector, the forbidden love, the wounded child, the unavailable parent, the healer, the destroyer, the one who awakens our sexuality, the one who gives us purpose, the one who seems to carry the missing half of our inner world. Archetypal attraction can feel deeply spiritual because archetypes are larger than ordinary personality. They come from symbolic structures inside the psyche. They carry mythic force. When someone appears to embody an archetype, the attraction can feel ancient, charged, sacred, or inevitable. A man may not only be experienced as a man, but as strength, protection, danger, authority, father, warrior, lover, or spiritual counterpart. A woman may not only be experienced as a woman, but as softness, mystery, mother, muse, goddess, sexuality, healing, or emotional home. These symbols can awaken deep inner material. Again, this is not inherently false or bad. Human beings do experience one another symbolically. We do not only see the person, we see meaning through the person. Attraction has always involved myth, fantasy, archetype, and imagination. But an archetype becomes dangerous when it replaces the person. If someone becomes the divine masculine, we may ignore the ordinary man's immaturity. If someone becomes the divine feminine, we may ignore the ordinary woman's unavailability. If someone becomes the healer, we may ignore the ways they harm. If someone becomes the forbidden love, we may romanticize instability. If someone becomes the sacred mirror, we may accept pain as teaching when it is actually disrespect. The archetype can make the person seem too meaningful to question, but conscious love must bring the archetype back down into reality. Who is this person beyond the symbol? How do they behave? How do they communicate? Can they repair? Can they take responsibility? Can they meet me in the ordinary world, not only in the mythic one? Do they deepen my consciousness, or do they keep me trapped in fantasy? A sacred mirror still needs integrity. A spiritual counterpart still needs emotional maturity. A powerful archetype still has to live through behavior. This brings us to the person as an unfinished story. Some people become charged because they seem to offer a different ending to an old emotional script. They arrive carrying the possibility that this time, the story will change. This time, the unavailable person will become available. This time, the distant figure will stay. This time, the person who makes us feel small will finally see our worth. This time, love will not leave. This time, longing will become union. The attraction may be less about the person's present reality and more about the ending they seem to promise. This is where destiny language can become especially seductive. If the person feels like the missing ending, then the relationship feels like fate. It feels as though life has brought us back to the old wound so it can finally be healed. But the question is, healed how? Healed by them finally choosing us? Or healed by us choosing ourselves when the pattern appears again? That may be one of the deepest distinctions in this episode. The psyche wants the old wound healed by the other person changing. Consciousness often asks us to heal by changing our participation in the pattern. If someone repeats the emotional climate of abandonment, the old self says, make them stay. The conscious self says, why am I drawn to someone whose presence feels uncertain? If someone repeats emotional distance, the old self says, win their closeness. The conscious self says, why does distance feel like value? If someone repeats the feeling of not being enough, the old self says, become enough for them. The conscious self says, why have I handed my worth to someone who cannot see me clearly? This is the difference between repeating the story and waking up inside it. The mirror layer does not say the connection is meaningless. It says the meaning may be different from the first interpretation. A person may reveal something profound without being meant to remain. They may awaken love, grief, desire, memory, creativity, and shadow without being capable of meeting us in relationship. They may be a catalyst rather than a companion, a mirror rather than a home, a lesson rather than a life partner. That can be painful because part of us wants meaning to equal continuation. If it mattered, surely it should last. If it was powerful, surely it should become relationship. If it felt sacred, surely it should be mutual. But human life does not always work that way. Some of the most meaningful people do not stay. Some of the most transformative connections are not stable enough to become love. Some people open doors they cannot walk through with us. So we have to distinguish mirror from mutuality. A mirror reveals, mutuality meets, a mirror activates, mutuality participates, a mirror shows us something. Mutuality builds something. A mirror may be meaningful even if it is one-sided. Mutuality requires both people to show up. This is crucial. A connection can be meaningful because of what it reveals inside us, but that does not automatically mean it is relationally mutual, emotionally safe, or meant to continue. The person may have awakened a truth, but awakening is not the same as partnership. The person may have carried symbolic importance, but symbolism is not the same as commitment. The mirror layer asks us to hold a more difficult but more honest question. What has this person become inside me? Have they become a projection, a wound, an archetype, an unfinished story, a sacred mirror, a fantasy of rescue, a symbol of worth, a promise of repair? If so, can I bring that meaning back into consciousness without needing the person to fulfill all of it? Because sometimes healing begins when we take the projected meaning back, not by saying the person did not matter, but by recognizing that what they awakened belongs partly to us. The desire they stirred, the creativity they opened, the tenderness they revealed, the longing they exposed, the wound they touched, the fantasy they activated, the need they made visible. They may have been the mirror, but the reflection is ours to integrate, and when that happens, the person becomes human again. Not God, not destiny, not salvation, not the only one who can heal the wound. A human being, perhaps important, perhaps beloved, perhaps painful, perhaps unforgettable, but still human. When we can see them as a person and a human being, we can see ourselves more clearly too. We can stop asking them to carry the weight of every unfinished story. We can stop treating intensity as instruction. We can stop calling projection fate. We can stop confusing being activated with being loved. This is not the death of mystery. It is the purification of it. Mystery becomes more sacred when it is not used to avoid reality. Love becomes more conscious when the other person is allowed to be both meaningful and human. And the self becomes freer when it no longer has to chase familiar pain in order to complete an old story. Cultural and digital conditioning, twin flames, spiritual TikTok, and algorithmic destiny. If the mirror layer shows us how one person can become a projection, wound, archetype, or unfinished story, the cultural layer asks what happens when the wider world begins feeding that projection back to us. Because today, soulmate language does not only live in poetry, religion, mythology, fairy tales, romantic films, or private longing. It lives in the feed. It lives in short-form videos. It lives in, quote, posts, tarot readings, twin flame communities, spiritual coaches, algorithmic relationship content. They are thinking of you videos, angel number interpretations, karmic bond explanations, divine masculine and divine feminine updates, and endless posts that turn romantic uncertainty into spiritual narrative. When someone is already emotionally activated, this content can feel as though it was sent directly to them. That is one of the most powerful and dangerous features of modern digital culture. It not only provides information, it reflects our state to us. If someone is longing, the feed can become full of longing. If someone is waiting, the feed can become full of waiting. If someone is trying to understand an unavailable bond, the feed can become full of explanations for unavailable bonds. If someone is searching for signs that a connection is destined, the feed can begin producing signs. This does not happen because the universe is always confirming the bond. Sometimes it happens because attention has trained the algorithm. A person watches a video about soulmates, then another appears. They watch a video about twin flames, then more arrive. They pause on a post about someone returning. They save a quote about divine timing. They listen to a tarot reading about separation. They search for why they cannot stop thinking about someone. Slowly, the digital field begins to organize around the wound. The feed becomes a spiritual echo chamber. The person begins to see the same message repeated through different voices. They feel it too. They are coming back. The separation is temporary. The bond is sacred. The pain is proof. The runner is awakening. Union is near. In that state, the algorithm can turn longing into a worldview. This is not a small thing, because when the same narrative appears repeatedly, it begins to feel less like content and more like confirmation. The person may begin to believe the connection is being validated by forces outside themselves, when in reality, the system may be responding to what they have already been attending to. The feed becomes a mirror of attachment, but disguises itself as destiny. This is where soulmate mythology becomes culturally powerful. The idea of the one is deeply embedded in romantic culture. Films, songs, novels, religious traditions, spiritual movements, and modern self-help language often suggest that there is someone who will complete the story, someone who will understand us beyond explanation, someone whose arrival will make the suffering meaningful, someone who will prove that every previous heartbreak was preparation, someone who will make ordinary love feel small by comparison. This mythology can be beautiful. It keeps alive the idea that love can be sacred. It protects a part of our imagination from reducing relationships to convenience, economics, biology, or social arrangements. It reminds us that people want more than transactional compatibility. They want reverence, recognition, depth, and meaning. But the same mythology can also make ordinary love feel insufficient. Real love is not always cinematic. It may not arrive with overwhelming signs. It may not trigger obsession. It may not feel like a cosmic storm. Sometimes, real love is steady, slow, embodied, respectful, humorous, quiet, built through small acts, built through repair, built through patience, built through choosing someone again after the fantasy has become a novelty. If we are conditioned to expect love to feel like destiny, then steady love can feel disappointing. If we expect intensity, calm can feel flat. If we expect a soulmate to awaken every hidden wound, a healthy relationship may feel less spiritually important. If we expect pain to prove depth, ease can be misread as lack. This is one of the distortions of soulmate culture. It can train people to distrust peace and worship intensity. Twin flame narratives intensify this further. The twin flame story often suggests that two souls are mirrors or counterparts, that one may run while the other chases, that separation is part of the journey, that pain is purifying, that obsession is an energetic connection, that emotional chaos is evidence of depth, and that eventual union will occur once both people are spiritually ready. For some people, this language may offer comfort during a confusing bond. It may help them reflect on projection, mirroring, spiritual growth, and the emotional intensity of a connection that changed them. Used carefully, it can become symbolic language for transformation. But used unconsciously, it can become a prison. If someone is unavailable, the story says they are running. If someone withdraws, the story says they are overwhelmed by the bond. If someone chooses another person, the story says they are avoiding the truth. If someone causes pain, the story says the pain is part of the purification process. If someone does not communicate, the story says communication is happening energetically. If someone does not return, the story says divine timing has not arrived yet. This can keep people attached to absence. Instead of asking, is this person actually showing up, they ask, what stage of the twin flame journey are we in? Instead of asking, is this healthy, they ask, what lesson is the universe teaching me? Instead of grieving the fact that someone is not choosing them, they keep interpreting the lack of choice as part of the spiritual narrative. This is where spiritual bypassing appears. Spiritual bypassing happens when spiritual language is used to avoid emotional truth. It can sound elevated, but underneath it may be a way of not feeling grief, not setting boundaries, not accepting incompatibility, not naming abandonment, not admitting that someone is unavailable, or not facing the possibility that the bond may be more one-sided than we hoped. A person may say it is divine timing, when the truth is that the other person is not making an effort. They may say we are energetically connected, when the truth is that there is no communication. They may say they are my mirror, when the truth is that the relationship is repeatedly destabilizing them. They may say this is a karmic lesson, when the lesson may simply be that they are allowed to leave. Again, this is not about mocking spiritual language. Spiritual language is and can be meaningful. It can hold mystery. It can name experiences that psychology alone does not fully capture. But if spiritual language makes us less truthful, less grounded, less self-respecting, and less able to respond to reality, then it is not expanding consciousness. It is protecting the wound. The algorithm makes this harder because it can keep feeding the bypass. A person in pain may not be searching for the most grounded interpretation, they may be searching for relief, and the content that gives relief often says what the wound wants to hear. They miss you, they are coming back, they regret losing you, they are afraid of the connection, they know you are the one. The universe is preparing a union, do not give up. That kind of content can become addictive because it gives emotional regulation without requiring reality. It soothes the nervous system for a moment. It turns uncertainty into hope. It turns absence into a story. It turns waiting into spiritual purpose. But after the relief fades, the person often needs another video, another reading, another sign, another confirmation. The cycle continues. Longing becomes content consumption. Grief becomes decoding. The pain is not integrated. It is repeatedly reactivated and reframed. This is especially common after the disposability of digital dating. Episode 11 explored how the digital dating arena can turn attraction into access, visibility, validation, and comparison. When that field feels shallow or dehumanizing, soulmate and twin flame narratives offer the opposite promise. They say, love is not random. You are not just another option. This person is not replaceable. This pain has meaning. This bond is sacred. The algorithmic marketplace becomes so empty that spiritual romanticism feels like a rescue. That makes sense. We need meaning. If dating apps make people feel like profiles, soulmate language makes them feel like souls. If swiping makes a connection feel disposable, destiny makes a connection feel eternal. If ghosting makes a person feel insignificant, twin flame language tells them the bond is so powerful that the other person had to run. If comparison makes love feel like a marketplace, spiritual romanticism returns a sense of sacredness. But relief is not always the truth. Sometimes, soulmate culture is a protest against the emptiness of modern dating. Sometimes it is the soul trying to reclaim depth in a world that has reduced connection to signals. But sometimes it becomes a fantasy structure built around unavailable people, familiar pain, and unresolved attachment. This is why communities built around waiting can be so dangerous. When people gather around the same wound, they can comfort each other, but they can also reinforce the wound. If everyone is interpreting absence as divine timing, no one has to grieve. If everyone is interpreting obsession as energetic connection, no one has to ask whether the nervous system is dysregulated. If everyone is waiting for a runner to return, no one has to ask whether waiting has become a substitute for living. A community can become healing when it helps people return to themselves. It becomes harmful when it keeps people attached to the person who is not present. The cultural layer of this episode asks us to become very careful with the stories we consume when we are emotionally vulnerable. Because not every story that comforts us liberates us. Some stories comfort us while keeping us trapped. Some narratives feel spiritual because they protect us from the grief of seeing clearly. Some signs feel sacred because they delay the pain of accepting reality. Yet the answer is not cynicism. The answer is not to mock people who believe in soulmates, twin flames, karmic bonds, or spiritual connection. Many people are simply trying to make sense of experiences that genuinely shook them, and I myself relate to spirituality. They are trying to hold longing, grief, synchronicity, dreams, bodily knowing, and the feeling that someone mattered beyond ordinary explanation. That deserves compassion. But compassion still requires honesty. A spiritual narrative should make a person more whole, not more dependent, more grounded, not more obsessive, more truthful, not more avoidant, more capable of love, not more trapped in waiting, more connected to reality, not less. So perhaps the key question is not, is this soulmate content true or false? The better question is, what is this content doing to my nervous system? Does it bring calm clarity or does it increase fixation? Does it help me grieve or help me avoid grief? Does it encourage dignity, boundaries, and self-restraint, or does it keep me loyal to someone obsessed? Does it make me more able to live, or more willing to pause my life for a story? Because the algorithm can turn longing into a spiritual worldview by repeatedly feeding the exact narrative the wound wants to believe. Conscious love asks us to interrupt that loop, to use spiritual language carefully, to honor mystery without becoming addicted to confirmation, to recognize signs without making them stronger than behavior, to respect the symbolic field without abandoning the present one, to remember that if love is truly sacred, it should not require us to disappear into waiting, fantasy, or self-abandonment. The cultural and digital field may keep telling us, this pain means they are your destiny. The deeper question remains, does this interpretation bring you closer to truth, or only closer to the story your wound already knows how to survive? The phenomenological and spiritual layer, honoring sacred connection without surrendering discernment after looking at attachment templates, repetition compulsion, familiar pain, projection, archetypes, soulmate mythology, twin flame narratives, spiritual bypassing, and algorithmic destiny. We arrive at the more delicate layer of this episode. The spiritual layer, and this layer needs care. It would be too easy to swing too far in either direction. One direction would be to dismiss every powerful connection as trauma, projection, attachment, or nervous system activation. That would flatten something real in human experience. It would take the mystery out of love and reduce every strange recognition, every synchronistic encounter, every transformative bond, every moment of deep resonance into pathology or conditioning. But the other direction would be to call every intense connection sacred, destined, karmic, or divinely orchestrated. That would be equally dangerous. It would give too much authority to the feeling and not enough attention to reality. It would allow spiritual language to cover over inconsistency, emotional unavailability, disrespect, obsession, self-abandonment, and familiar pain. So the path here is not cynicism, and it is not blind belief. It is discernment inside mystery. Some connections do feel different. Some people arrive in our lives and awaken something that ordinary language struggles to hold. They may not fit neatly into compatibility, attraction, chemistry, or attachment. Their presence may stir creativity, grief, desire, intuition, memory, longing, consciousness, or a strange sense of recognition. A conversation may feel like it opens a hidden room. A meeting may feel timed. A person may appear when the psyche is already at a threshold. Something about the encounter may feel symbolic before we understand why. These experiences do not need to be mocked. They are part of human life. Some people enter our world and alter the internal landscape. They make us ask different questions. They reveal parts of ourselves we did not know were waiting. They expose loneliness, desire, tenderness, fear, faith, rage, grief, and the ache to be known. Sometimes they awaken the body. Sometimes they awaken the soul. Sometimes they awaken the wound. Sometimes all three happen at once. This is why spiritual language becomes appealing. It gives shape to the enormity of the experience. It says this was not random, this mattered. This person arrived for a reason. This connection touched something beyond ordinary explanation. Sometimes that may be true, but the meaning of a connection does not always tell us the form it should take. That is one of the most important distinctions in this episode. A connection can be spiritually significant without being a romantic life partnership. A person can be a sacred mirror without being someone who can love us well. A bond can be transformative without being meant to continue. A meeting can be meaningful without requiring us to wait, chase, explain, rescue, or return. A person can awaken something profound in us and still not be safe, available, mature, honest, or able to meet the connection in reality. This is where many people get caught. They assume spiritual significance must mean romantic continuation. They assume intensity means instruction. They assume mystery means destiny. They assume pain means purification. They assume longing means truth. They assume the person who awakened them must also be the person who completes them. But awakening and partnership are not the same thing. A person may awaken your desire, but not be able to honor your heart. They may awaken your intuition, but not be able to communicate clearly. They may awaken your grief, but not responsible for healing all of it. They may awaken your creativity, but not be a safe place to build love. They may awaken your shadow, but that does not mean you should stay inside the shadow with them. A sacred connection, if it is truly sacred, should not require the abandonment of self. It should not ask us to ignore repeated behavior. It should not demand that we call confusion love. It should not make us smaller, more anxious, more obsessive, more dependent, more willing to accept crumbs, more separated from our dignity, or more loyal to a fantasy than to truth. This is where spiritual maturity enters. Spiritual maturity is not the ability to believe the most dramatic story. It is the ability to hold meaning without losing reality. It is the ability to say this connection is meaningful while also asking, is it mutual? It is the ability to say, I feel something powerful while also asking, is this healthy? It is the ability to say there may be mystery here while also asking, what is actually happening? It is the ability to say, this person awakened something in me, while also asking, does that mean they are meant to remain, or does it mean I now have something to integrate? That is a very different kind of spirituality. It does not use the sacred to escape humanity. It brings the sacred into humanity, into behavior, into communication, into boundaries, into repair, into emotional responsibility, into the ordinary evidence of whether two people can actually meet. Because love, if it is to become real, must eventually come down from the mythic layer into lived presence. It must touch communication. It must touch consistency. It must touch the body. It must touch the truth. It must touch how someone behaves when they are tired, afraid, disappointed, uncertain, or confronted. It must address whether it can be repaired after rupture. It must touch whether they can be honest when fantasy ends and reality begins. A connection cannot live forever on signs, dreams, synchronicities, song numbers, readings, feelings, and symbolic meaning. Those things may matter. They may open a reflection. They may speak to the psyche. They may even form part of the mystery around the connection. But they cannot replace the grounded requirements of love. Presence, mutuality, respect, communication, care, responsibility, embodied truth. Without those, the sacred story may become a beautiful cage. This is why the idea of a sacred mirror is useful, but only if we understand it properly. A sacred mirror is not something we must possess. It is not someone who automatically belongs in our lives romantically. It is not a person whose pain we must tolerate because they are teaching us. A sacred mirror is someone who reveals something. They may show us our longing, our wound, our capacity for love, our fear of abandonment, our hunger for union, our tendency to project, for our need to be chosen, our shadow, our beauty and our liveliness. But a mirror is not always a home. A mirror can show us what needs to be integrated, but it cannot do the integration for us. A mirror can reveal the wound, but it cannot always heal the wound. A mirror can awaken love, but it cannot guarantee that love is shared in a grounded, responsible, mutual way. Sometimes the most spiritually mature response to a sacred mirror is not to chase it, but to learn from it. To ask, what did this person reveal? What part of me became visible? What longing surfaced? What wound opened? What did I project? What did I hope they would save me from? What did I call destiny because I was afraid to grieve? What did I call love because I did not want to feel the ache of unmet need? This does not reduce the connection. It clarifies it, and clarity does not destroy sacredness. It protects it. When mystery is not held with discernment, it can become illusion. But when mystery is held with truth, it becomes initiation. It changes us without making us abandon ourselves. It opens us without making us blind. It teaches us without requiring us to stay in pain. This is where love as presence becomes more important than love as myth. Myth has its place. Human beings have always needed myth to understand love. We need stories of union, separation, devotion, sacrifice, longing, transformation, and return. Myth gives symbolic depth to what the heart experiences. But myth becomes dangerous when it replaces presence. Presence is simple, but it is difficult. Presence says, are they here? Are they honest? Are they willing? Are they able? Are they kind? Are they consistent? Are they growing? Are they communicating? Are they meeting me as a human being, or do I have to keep meeting them as a symbol? This question matters because many people stay attached to myth while starving for presence. They have the story, but not the relationship. The signs, but not the communication. The intensity, but not the care. The longing, but not the mutuality. The spiritual language, but not the emotional responsibility. The body knows the difference. The body may be activated by myth, but it is nourished by presence. It may be stirred by fantasy, but it settles through consistency. It may be awakened by intensity, but it heals through safety. It may be drawn to the sacred story, but it still needs real behavior. So the spiritual layer of this episode asks us to honor sacred connection without surrendering discernment. To let the mystery breathe, but not let it rule. To allow that some people may arrive with meaning, but not assume that meaning gives them authority over our lives. To recognize that a bond can feel ancient, karmic, synchronistic, or soul deep, while still needing to be tested by the ordinary measures of human love. Does this connection make me more truthful, more whole, more grounded, more loving, more self-respecting, more awake? Or does it make me more anxious, more obsessive, more avoidant of grief, more dependent on signs, more willing to accept absence as destiny? That is where the distinction becomes clearer. A connection that opens consciousness will eventually return us to ourselves, even if it hurts. A connection that traps us in fantasy will keep us circling the other person, waiting for them to become the answer. The first may be sacred. The second may be the wound wearing sacred language. This is not always easy to admit, because sometimes the story is beautiful. Sometimes the fantasy keeps us alive when the reality feels too painful. Sometimes soulmate language protects us from humiliation. It lets us say this mattered, when the outer world may not understand why. It lets us preserve dignity around a bond that did not become what we hoped. It lets us believe that the ache was not meaningless. Perhaps the ache was not meaningless, but meaningful does not always mean meant to continue. That sentence may be one of the central spiritual truths of this episode. Meaningful does not always mean meant to continue. Some connections matter because they stay. Others matter because they awaken us and leave. Some teach us how to open. Others teach us where we abandon ourselves. Some show us love. Others show us our hunger for love. Some help us heal. Others reveal what still needs healing. Some are companions. Others are catalysts. If we try to turn every catalyst into a companion, we may suffer longer than necessary. If we try to turn every wound into destiny, we may miss the actual invitation. The invitation of integration. To integrate a connection is to take back what we projected, to grieve what was not real, to honor what was real, to release what cannot be lived, and to carry forward the consciousness it awakened. Integration says, this person mattered, but they are not the owner of what they awakened in me. It says, the love I felt reveals my capacity to love. It says, the desire I felt reveals my aliveness. It says, the grief I feel reveals that something touched me. It says, the wound that opened is asking for care, not repetition. That is sacred work, not glamorous. Not always romantic, but sacred. The deepest spiritual relationships are not always the ones that become lifelong unions. Sometimes they are the ones that return us to the truth of ourselves. The ones that show us where fantasy has replaced reality. The ones that teach us to stop confusing longing with love. The ones that make us realize that devotion without self-respect is not devotion. It is abandonment dressed as loyalty. So yes, honor the mystery. Honor the person who changed you. Honor the strange timing, the feeling, the resonance, the ache, the way they entered your inner world and rearranged something. But do not surrender your discernment. Do not give the story more authority than reality. Do not call absence sacred if it is simply absence. Do not call inconsistency divine if it is simply inconsistency. Do not call obsession love if it is keeping you from living. Do not call familiar pain destiny just because it arrived wearing spiritual language. Because love can be sacred and grounded, spiritual and honest, mysterious and clear, passionate and safe, transformative and respectful. If a connection cannot meet reality, then perhaps its role was not to become the relationship you imagined. Perhaps its role was to show you what still needed to be seen, reclaimed, grieved, and integrated. Mystery deserves respect, but not the surrender of self. Spiritual meaning deserves attention, but not more authority than truth. Conscious love asks us to hold both, the possibility that a connection may be sacred, and the responsibility to ask whether it is also real, mutual, embodied, and worthy of the life we are giving to it. Personal reflection. The seduction of meaning when the nervous system is activated. When I think about soulmates and shadow attraction, I understand why people reach for spiritual language. When a connection feels powerful, ordinary words can feel too small. Attraction does not always explain it. Chemistry does not always explain it. Attachment can sound too clinical. Obsession can sound too dismissive. Sometimes a person enters awareness with such force that the mind naturally searches for a larger frame. Soulmate, destiny, karmic bond, sacred mirror, twin flame. Something meant. I do not want to mock that instinct, because the need for meaning is deeply human, and I relate so much to spirituality myself. Through my wider work with this place called Earth, the Inversiverse, the resonance matrix, nervous system language, and my inner child was broken, I keep returning to the space between perception and projection, longing and truth, nervous system activation, and deeper recognition. We are meaning-making creatures. We do not just feel things, we interpret them. We turn pain into a story, attraction into a symbol, timing into a message, and intensity into evidence. But I also think the more charged a connection becomes, the more carefully we have to listen to what part of us is speaking. Is it the grounded self recognizing something true? Is it the wounded self hoping this time the old story will end differently? Is it intuition or attachment? Is it love or the ache of wanting to be chosen? Is it spiritual recognition or familiar pain returning with a sacred name? That is where discernment matters. Not because mystery is false, but because mystery can easily become a hiding place when the nervous system is activated. If a connection makes us more honest, more present, more whole, and more connected to reality, perhaps it is teaching us something important. But if it makes us smaller, more obsessive, more anxious, more dependent on signs, or more willing to excuse absence and inconsistency, then we have to ask whether we are honoring love or protecting a wound. For me, the deeper work is not to strip the connection of meaning. It is to stop giving meaning more authority than truth. A person can matter deeply without being our destiny. A bond can reveal something sacred without requiring a lifelong union. Sometimes the most important connection is not the one that completes the story. Sometimes it is the one that finally shows us the story we have been repeating. Observation practice. Is this love, projection, or familiar pain? For this episode, the practice is to choose one connection, past or present, that felt unusually charged, destined, difficult to release, or spiritually significant. It may be someone you loved, someone you desired, someone who never fully arrived, someone who hurt you, someone who felt like a mirror, or someone whose meaning seemed larger than the actual relationship. Bring that person to mind gently, without forcing an answer. Then ask, what exactly felt familiar here? Did the connection feel peaceful, or did it feel like an old emotional climate returning? Did it bring presence, or did it create waiting, decoding, chasing, proving, or anxiety? Did it make you feel more yourself, or did you begin shaping yourself around the hope of being chosen? Notice what the person represented. Were you relating to who they actually were, or to what they seemed to promise? Did they represent safety, rescue, passion, destiny, healing, status, validation, spiritual recognition, or the chance to finally rewrite an old wound? Then ask, what did this connection do to my nervous system? Did I feel grounded, open, and clear, or activated, obsessive, unsettled, and dependent on their attention? Did the intensity grow through reality, communication, mutuality, and care, or did it grow through absence, uncertainty, fantasy, and hope? This is not about dismissing the connection. It is not about mocking the mystery or shaming longing. Some connections are meaningful. Some people arrive as mirrors. Some bonds genuinely awaken something profound. But the practice is to ask whether the connection is opening consciousness or repeating pain. Is this love, projection, or a familiar ache? Is this recognition or repetition? Is this sacred connection, or an old wound asking to be chosen differently? Let the answers come slowly. You do not have to force certainty. Just notice whether the connection returns you to dignity, truth, and grounded love, or whether it keeps you waiting inside a story that reality has not confirmed. Because sometimes healing begins when we can honor what someone awakened, without needing them to become the person who completes it. Integration line, from projection to threat detection. So this is where episode 12 brings us. Soulmate language, destiny narratives, twin flame mythology, shadow attraction, and familiar pain all belong to the same deeper inquiry. How do we interpret powerful emotional recognition? The recognition is not simple. Sometimes we recognize truth. Sometimes we recognize compatibility. Sometimes we recognize someone whose presence genuinely deepens our life. Sometimes we recognize emotional safety, shared values, mutual desire, spiritual resonance, or the rare feeling of being met beyond performance. But sometimes recognition is not about the other person being right for us. Sometimes recognition is the nervous system encountering an old emotional climate, a familiar absence, a familiarity, a familiar need to be chosen, a familiar intensity around someone inconsistent, unavailable, distant, or difficult to reach. The body says, I know this, and the mind, hungry for meaning, may call it fate. That does not mean the connection is meaningless. In many ways, these connections can be some of the most meaningful because they reveal the hidden architecture of our longing. They show us where the old wound still lives. They show us where love became confused with pursuit, where attention became confused with worth, where intensity became confused with intimacy, and where spiritual language began carrying emotional pain that had not yet been integrated. A connection may feel destined because it is genuinely meaningful, but it may also feel destined because the nervous system has recognized an old wound, an old pattern, an old longing, or an unfinished story. The old frame says, if it feels destined, it must be love. The deeper frame says, destiny language may describe meaning, but it does not automatically prove mutuality, safety, or truth. The old frame says, this pain proves the bond is deep. The deeper frame says, pain may reveal attachment, activation, or familiar wounds, not necessarily sacred love. The old frame says, they are my soulmate, so I should wait. The deeper frame says, a meaningful connection still requires presence, communication, responsibility, and reality. The old frame says, the intensity means this is special. The deeper frame says, intensity may be passion, but it may also be nervous system activation. This is not a rejection of mystery. It is an invitation to mature the way we hold mystery. A person can arrive with meaning without being our final destination. A bond can be spiritually significant without becoming a relationship. A connection can be unforgettable without being healthy. Someone can awaken love, desire, grief, creativity, longing, and self-recognition without being able to meet us with consistency, care, and emotional responsibility. That may be difficult to accept because part of us wants meaning to equal continuation. If it mattered, we want it to last. If it was powerful, we want it to be mutual. If it felt sacred, we want it to become love in the form we imagined. But conscious love asks for a more grounded kind of honesty. Sometimes a person comes to reveal where we are still waiting to be chosen. Sometimes they show us what we are capable of feeling. Sometimes they reveal the parts of ourselves we projected outside the body. Sometimes they become the mirror that shows us where familiar pain has been wearing the language of destiny. Once someone becomes valuable, desired, projected upon, or symbolically charged, another layer enters the field: fear. If we believe someone is our destiny, we may fear losing them more intensely. If they carry our projected worth, we may become threatened by anyone who seems to pull their attention away. If they represent healing, we may become terrified of abandonment. If they become the symbol of our future, our identity, or our spiritual story, then any distance, rival, delay, silence, uncertainty, or comparison can activate the nervous system. That is the bridge into episode 13. If episode 12 has explored how people spiritualize attachment, project destiny, and sometimes mistake familiar pain for love, episode 13 moves into what happens when the bond feels threatened. Once attraction becomes symbolic, fear can appear as possession, surveillance, compare and control, or relational threat detection. Because jealousy is not only insecurity, it is often the nervous system detecting possible loss. It is the body asking whether the bond is safe, whether we are still chosen, whether someone else has become a threat, and whether the connection we have invested in can disappear. In episode 13, we move into jealousy, polarity, and possession territory, masculine, feminine energy, and relational threat. Soulmates and shadow attraction live close together because both involve recognition. Sometimes we recognize truth. Sometimes we recognize longing. Sometimes we recognize a person who meets us deeply. Sometimes we recognize a wound wearing a familiar face. That is why this terrain is so delicate. It is not enough to mock soulmate language because some connections do feel profound. It is not enough to call everything trauma because some people genuinely do awaken something meaningful, beautiful, and life-changing in us. But it is also not enough to call everything destiny simply because it feels intense. Conscious love asks us to slow down before handing a connection the full authority of fate. It asks us to ask whether the bond is mutual, grounded, safe, honest, embodied, and real. It asks us to ask whether the person is truly present, or whether they have become a symbol for something unfinished inside us, because a person can be a mirror without being a home. They can be a catalyst without being a partner. They can reveal the wound without being the one who heals it. They can awaken desire without being able to honor the heart. They can carry spiritual meaning without being capable of lived love. That is not always easy to accept. Sometimes the story is beautiful. Sometimes destiny language feels more bearable than grief. Sometimes calling someone a soulmate protects us from the humiliation of realizing they did not choose us in the way we hoped. Sometimes twin flame language turns waiting into purpose. Sometimes karmic language makes pain feel less random. But love that requires us to abandon reality is not conscious love. A sacred connection should not make us less truthful. It should not make us smaller, more obsessive, more dependent on signs, or more willing to excuse absence and inconsistency. If the connection is meaningful, then the meaning should help us wake up, not disappear. So to close this episode, I leave you with this. Perhaps the real question is not, are they my soulmate? Perhaps the deeper question is, what part of me is calling this destiny? Is it love or longing, recognition or repetition, spiritual truth or emotional familiarity, a sacred mirror or an old wound asking to be chosen differently? Can I honor the mystery without ignoring behavior? Can I feel the intensity without surrendering discernment? Can I allow someone to reveal something profound in me without handing them authority over my worth, my future, or my healing? And if this connection was or is meaningful, can I let it mean something without forcing it to become everything? Until next time, thank you for joining me today. You've been listening to The Resonance Between Us, Episode 12, Soulmates and Shadow Attraction, Destiny, Projection, and Familiar Pain. I'm James Miller.